Grace Miller finished sweeping the dirt yard, just as she had every morning for the past 50 years. Her hands, weathered by decades of washing other people's clothes in the cold creek, clung to the worn-out broom as if it were the only thing holding her upright. The knuckles were thick as tree roots, the skin cracked and mapped with the fine lines of a life of hardship. In the pocket of her faded apron, she felt the familiar crinkle of the yellowed letter her grandfather had given her just before he passed, a folded piece of paper written in a swirling script she could never decipher because she never had the chance to learn to read. She would often trace the faded ink with a calloused fingertip, imagining the words were a final blessing from him. What Grace didn't know, what no one in the quiet Appalachian hills could possibly imagine, was that this fragile letter contained the exact coordinates of a secret that would unravel her destiny and rewrite the very meaning of her existence. Before we continue with Grace's journey, we want to let you know that this story is a work of fiction, created to inspire reflection and touch the heart. It was developed with the assistance of artificial intelligence, but has been carefully reviewed, edited, and infused with human emotion by our creative team to ensure it carries a meaningful and authentic message. We believe that stories are a powerful way to explore the complexities of family, sacrifice, and justice. If this story is already beginning to resonate with you, we kindly ask for your support. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, give this video a thumbs up, and let us know in the comments what city or country you are watching from. Your interaction helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives to life for a community that values them as much as we do. Thank you for being part of our audience. Inside her small wooden shack, the air was thick with the comforting smell of wood smoke and baking cornbread, a scent that had clung to the walls for as long as she could remember. Grace, at 72 years old, moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her body a testament to a lifetime of relentless labor. She leaned over the old wood stove, the heat warming a face etched with the deep lines of worry and resilience. Every movement was an echo of 60 years of service to others, of carrying heavy buckets of water from the creek, of scrubbing floors on her hands and knees, of picking beans under a scorching Kentucky sun. Now, her days were marked by a profound and heavy silence, a loneliness that seemed to weigh more than any physical burden she had ever carried. Her only son, Richard, lived in a faraway city, a world away from the dirt floors and peeling paint of her humble home, and his absence was a constant aching presence in the quiet shack. Her chores done for the morning, Grace sat on the edge of her simple cot and once again pulled the yellowed letter from her apron. The paper felt as fragile as a dried leaf, and she handled it with a reverence reserved for the holiest of relics. It was her only tangible connection to her lineage, a silent promise from a past she barely remembered. As she held it, her mind drifted back through the years to the biting cold of the creek water on her knees as she washed the fine clothes of the town's wealthier families, her hands turning raw and blue, all to gather enough money to send Richard to college. He was going to be an accountant, he had promised, someone important who would never have to suffer as she had. She had believed him with every fiber of her being, sacrificing her own health and comfort for his future. She carefully folded the letter and put it back, unaware that within those unreadable words slept the poetic justice that life had long owed her. The memories were a river, and tonight they ran deep and cold. Pulling her back to the year her husband, a man as sturdy as the oaks on the hill, was taken by a fever that swept through the mountains. Suddenly Grace was alone, with a 5-year-old boy named Richard, whose eyes were too big for his face, reflecting a world of questions she had no answers for. The shack, once filled with her husband's quiet strength and the scent of cut pine, became a cavern of silence broken only by the wind whistling through the chinks in the walls. Her hands, still young but already learning the language of hardship, held Richard's small ones tightly. She looked at his face, a perfect blend of her own, and the man she had lost, and made a silent vow. He would not know this cold, this hunger, this life of scraping by. His future would be built stone by stone, even if she had to carve those stones from her own bones. Her days began before the sun, when the Appalachian mist still clung to the hollows like a damp shroud. She became the town's washerwoman, a role that demanded more than it ever gave back. Her true workplace was the icy creek that ran behind the wealthier properties on the other side of the ridge. In the biting cold of winter, she would kneel on the frozen bank, her knuckles splitting open as she plunged her arms into the frigid water, scrubbing away the stains from fabrics she could never dream of affording. The harsh lye soap ate at her skin, leaving her hands permanently chapped and raw. She would haul the heavy wet linens in a wicker basket that dug into her back, her breath forming clouds in the air, her own clothes soaked through. The smell of bleach and damp earth became her constant perfume, a scent of servitude that clung to her very being, and which she prayed her son would never have to recognize as his own. When Richard was old enough for school, the cost of books and a single decent set of clothes felt like a mountain she could not climb. Her only possession of value was a small flock of 3 goats her father had left her, their bleating a familiar and comforting sound in the quiet mornings. With a heart that felt as heavy as a river stone, she led them to the market. She sold them to a farmer for a handful of dollars, avoiding the gentle eyes of the animals she had raised from kids. The man counted the worn bills into her palm, the money feeling both sacred and profane. That evening, as Richard proudly traced the letters in his new reader by candlelight, Grace stared into the fire, the silence in the yard where the goats used to be a deafening testament to the price of his education. It was the first of many pieces of her own life she would sell off for his, a transaction of hope that left her a little poorer and a little emptier each time. The years that followed were a blur of relentless, grinding sacrifice. Every meal was a quiet calculation. She would serve Richard the single egg from their lone hen, the thickest piece of cornbread, the small portion of beans that had simmered all day. When he asked why she wasn't eating, she would simply smile and say, "I ate while I was cooking, son, I'm full." It was a lie that became her truth. In the dead of night, after he was asleep, she would mend his worn shirts by the flickering flame of a single candle, her eyes straining in the dim light until they ached. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard under her cot was a rusty coffee can. Into this can, she would drop any spare coin she managed to save, a penny here, a nickel there. It was a secret ritual, a silent prayer. Each coin a tiny metallic brick in the foundation of the future she was building for him, a future that had to exist somewhere far away from this shack. The day Richard received his acceptance letter to a community college in Texas to study accounting, Grace felt a surge of pride so fierce it nearly brought her to her knees. He was going to be somebody. He was going to work with numbers, not with his hands. That night she pried up the floorboard and pulled out the coffee can, its weight a dense, satisfying testament to nearly 15 years of skipped meals and endless toil. She poured the mountain of coins and crumpled bills onto the small wooden table. It was all there, every last cent she had. Her hands, now gnarled and twisted like old roots, pushed the pile toward him. "This is for you," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You go and make a life for yourself, Richard. A good life." He looked at the money, then at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before he simply nodded, the promise of the city already pulling him away from her. She stood on the dirt path and watched him board the Greyhound bus, a tall, handsome young man with her eyes and a future she had purchased for him with her past. He waved once from the window, a quick, almost dismissive gesture, before the bus rumbled to life, kicking up a cloud of dust that coated her worn dress. Grace didn't move. She stood there long after the sound of the engine had faded, long after the dust had settled back onto the road, leaving it empty once more. She turned and walked back to the shack. The silence that greeted her was different this time. It wasn't the quiet of peace or the hush of a sleeping child. It was a profound, echoing emptiness, the sound of a purpose fulfilled and a life left behind. She ran a hand over the rough wood of the doorframe, her work finally done, and stepped into the lonely quiet of her new reality. Miles away, in a world carved from glass and steel, Richard Miller adjusts the knot of his silk tie. He stands on the 25th floor of a Dallas skyscraper, looking out over a sprawling cityscape that seems to pulse with ambition and wealth. The air in his office at Prestige Capital is cool and sterile, smelling faintly of expensive leather and freshly brewed espresso, a stark, silent rebuke to the scent of wood smoke and damp earth that defined his childhood. His suit is impeccably tailored, his shoes shine with a professional gloss, and his hands, soft and uncalloused, show no trace of the manual labor that paid for his escape. He is a man meticulously constructed, a living monument to the life he chose to invent, built upon the forgotten foundations of a life he desperately wanted to erase. The chasm between his world and the wooden shack in the Kentucky hills is not measured in miles, but in the deliberate, systematic burial of his own history. His phone buzzes on the polished mahogany desk. It's a message from his wife, Victoria, a picture of a new designer handbag with the caption, "Isn't it divine?" Richard met Victoria at a charity gala, an event orchestrated by her father, the formidable Mr. Crawford, a high-profile attorney and investment partner whose name opened every door in the city. Richard, the bright young accountant from the firm Mr. Crawford's company used, impressed him with his sharp mind and seemingly clean slate. Victoria, raised in a world of country clubs and debutante balls, was drawn to his ambition, seeing him as a promising asset to her family's legacy. She never questioned his background, accepting his polished narrative without a second thought. Her world was one of surfaces, and Richard's surface was flawless, reflecting back the exact image of success she had been taught to admire and acquire. The lie has become his second skin, a comfortable garment he wears at all times. During a dinner with Mr. Crawford's associates, one of the older partners, a man with a kind but inquisitive face, asks about his family. "You're a self-made man. Richard, your parents must be incredibly proud." Richard smiles, a practiced, easy expression that betrays no hint of the turmoil beneath. "They passed away in a car accident when I was in college," he says, the words flowing with the ease of long repetition. "They were simple country people, very humble. I like to think they'd be happy for me." He takes a sip of his wine, the cool glass a steadying presence in his hand. The table murmurs with sympathy, and the conversation moves on. No one suspects that the orphan they are pitying is a fiction, a ghost created to protect the fragile architecture of his new life from the inconvenient truth of a living mother. One Saturday afternoon, while decluttering their sterile minimalist apartment, Victoria pulls a small, forgotten cardboard box from the back of a closet. Inside, among old college textbooks and papers, she finds a single faded photograph. It shows a woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile, her hands resting in the lap of a worn flower print dress, standing in front of a rustic wooden shack. Victoria holds it at arm's length, her nose wrinkling slightly in distaste. "Richard, who is this woman?" she asks, her voice laced with a casual upper-class disdain. "She looks so provincial. Look at those clothes." The question hangs in the air, sharp and dangerous. For a moment, Richard sees his mother not through his own memories of sacrifice, but through Victoria's judgmental eyes. Poor, unsophisticated, and embarrassment. A hot flush of shame crawls up his neck, tightening its grip around him. He moves quickly, snatching the photograph from her manicured fingers with more force than intended. "It's no one," he says, his voice clipped and harsh. "Just an old housekeeper from my childhood. She was fond of me." The lie comes easily, another brick in the wall he has built around his past. Victoria, ever incurious about things she deems unimportant, simply shrugs and turns her attention back to a catalogue of modern furniture, the image of the woman already forgotten. But Richard can't let it go. He stares at the picture of Grace, at the love etched into the lines around her eyes, and feels a potent mix of guilt and terror. He quickly walks into his home office, tears the photograph into small, unrecognizable pieces, and drops them into the wastebasket, burying the last physical evidence of his mother, as if he were disposing of a crime. This act of destruction is a symbol of his entire existence in Dallas. He has systematically purged every remnant of his upbringing. He trained himself to lose his slight Appalachian accent, replacing it with the neutral, clipped tones of the corporate world. He concocted stories of a fictional childhood, of summer camps and family vacations that never happened. He has become a master of omission and invention, a man who lives in constant low-grade fear of being exposed. As he looks at his reflection in the dark glass of the skyscraper window, he sees the man he always wanted to be, successful, respected, and utterly alone. A hollow man haunted by the ghost of a mother he had to kill in his own mind in order to feel alive. The life he built is a magnificent, gleaming cage, and he is both its architect and its prisoner. The quiet of the Appalachian morning was shattered not by a familiar sound, but by an alien one, the low, aggressive purr of an expensive engine. A sleek black sedan, its polished surface reflecting the gnarled oak trees in distorted shapes, crawled up the dirt path and came to a stop, kicking up a cloud of reddish dust that settled on Grace's porch steps. Richard emerged from the driver's side, his tailored suit a stark, dark gash against the rustic greens and browns of the hillside. He was not alone. 2 other men, also in dark suits and carrying leather briefcases, got out with him. Grace felt a flicker of hope in her chest, a foolish, maternal instinct that he had come to visit, but it was extinguished as soon as she saw his face. His expression was not that of a son returning home, but of a vulture circling a property, his eyes scanning the shack's floors with a cold, appraising distance that made her feel like a trespasser in her own life. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, forgoing a hug or even a simple touch of the hand. His words were as sterile and unnerving as his appearance, a carefully rehearsed speech that belonged in a boardroom, not on the porch of his childhood home. He spoke of structural integrity issues, of imminent safety hazards, and the prohibitive cost of remediation. He gestured vaguely at a crack in the wooden wall, a loose board on the porch, transforming the familiar imperfections of her home into a legal argument for its condemnation. He presented his arrival not as a visit, but as a rescue mission. "It's for your own good, Mum," he said, the phrase a hollow, polished stone. "This place is a death trap. We've found a much more suitable arrangement for you." The 2 men behind him stood like silent sentinels, their presence turning his suggestion into an unassailable verdict. Grace didn't understand all the words, but she understood the chilling finality in his tone. One of the men opened his briefcase on the small rickety table on the porch, revealing a sheaf of official-looking documents. The lawyer began to speak in a rapid, monotone drone, his words a meaningless river of legal jargon. Richard cut him off with a wave of his hand. "It's just a formality, Mum. You just need to sign here to transfer the property. It's worthless, but the buyer is willing to give you something for the land." He pointed to a line at the bottom of the page. When Grace explained that she couldn't write her name, a flicker of annoyance crossed Richard's face. Without a word, he took her right hand in his. Her skin was rough and calloused against his smooth, soft palm. He pressed her thumb firmly onto a black ink pad, then guided it to the paper, leaving a dark, smudged fingerprint as her signature. The act felt like a violation, a branding. He released her hand as if it were burning hot, wiping his own on his trousers. The second man, the buyer, then counted out $500 onto the table. The bills were crisp and new, a stack of Ulysses S. Grant's stern face looking up at her, a fortune and an insult all at once. The money seemed to mock the decades of labor she had poured into this land, the value of her entire existence calculated and dismissed in a single small pile of paper. Richard pushed the money toward her. "This will be more than enough to get you started somewhere new," he said, his gaze fixed on a point just over her shoulder. A desperate, trembling hope rose in Grace's throat, a final plea from a mother's heart. "Richard," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "can't I just come with you to Dallas? I can cook, I can clean, I wouldn't be any trouble at all. I just don't want to be alone." The question, so simple and so profound, hung in the heavy air between them, a final test of his humanity. Richard's body tensed. He glanced down at his gleaming wristwatch, an unconscious gesture of impatience, as if her plea were an inconvenient delay in his schedule. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen lighting up his face with a cold blue glow. Though she couldn't read the words, Grace could see the message from Victoria pop up on the screen, a name she had only heard but never met. His thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before his expression hardened, solidifying into a mask of detached resolve. The brief, almost imperceptible battle within him was over, and the son she had raised had lost. He slid the phone back into his pocket, the connection to his new life severing the last thread to his old one. "That's not going to be possible, Mum," he said, his voice now completely flat, devoid of any warmth or regret. "You wouldn't be happy there. It's a different world. You'll be much more comfortable in Pineville with your own kind." He reached into his suit jacket and placed a single, flimsy bus ticket on the table next to the money. along with a small piece of paper on which an address was neatly printed. The gesture was clinical, like a doctor prescribing a bitter but necessary medicine. He was solving a problem, not caring for his mother. "The bus leaves from the depot in an hour. This is the address of a boarding house. It's all arranged," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument or questions. He was already turning to leave, his duty performed, his conscience, such as it was, cleared. He offered no hug, no final look, no words of comfort. He simply walked away, his expensive shoes crunching on the dirt path, his back straight and unyielding. He and the other men got back into the car, the doors closing with a soft, definitive thud that echoed the closing of a door in Grace's heart. From the threshold of the home that was no longer hers, Grace watched the black car reverse down the path. Through the tinted rear window, she could just make out the silhouette of her son, his head facing forward, never once looking back. The car reached the main road and accelerated, disappearing around a bend and leaving only a lingering cloud of dust to prove it had ever been there. The dust settled slowly, coating the porch railings, the wilting flowers in her tin cans, and the sleeve of her faded dress. She was left standing alone, clutching a bus ticket to a place she did not know, with a suitcase containing all she owned in the world, and $500, the officially appraised value of a lifetime of sacrifice. The oppressive silence of the hills descended once more, but this time it was heavier, colder, filled with the deafening sound of absolute and final abandonment. The room in Pineville is not a home. It is a cage. Measuring no more than 6 by 9 feet, its very air is heavy with the ghosts of forgotten lives, smelling of mildew, stale cigarette smoke, and a profound, bone-deep dampness. Water stains creep down the walls like weeping sores, the peeling paint curling away to reveal the crumbling plaster beneath. A single, grime-covered window looks out onto a brick wall, allowing only a sliver of grey, indifferent light to penetrate the gloom. Grace spends her days sitting on the edge of a lumpy mattress that sags in the middle, her gnarled hands resting in her lap, motionless. The $500, which had seemed like such a sum, evaporated after the first month's rent and a few meager bags of groceries, leaving her with nothing but the 4 suffocating walls and the echoing silence of her son's betrayal. This was the comfort he had chosen for her, a final, definitive statement on her worth. Her first attempts to survive are met with a quiet, polite cruelty. She walks the main street of Pineville, her body stooped with age but her spirit still clinging to the idea of work. She offers to clean, to wash, to mend clothes, her voice soft but steady. Shop owners look at her hands, twisted and arthritic, and then look away, shaking their heads. "We're not hiring right now, ma'am," they say, their pity a thin veil for their dismissal. A younger woman at a laundromat simply laughs, "Honey, I think those days are behind you." Each rejection is a small death, chipping away at the dignity she has held onto for a lifetime. She is no longer a person with skills and a history of tireless labor. She is just an old woman, a burden, an inconvenience to be moved along. The world Richard has thrown her into has no use for the very qualities of resilience and hard work that built his own success. With the last of her coins clutched in her fist, she enters the small corner market, the bell above the door announcing her desperate presence. The smell of fresh bread and cured meats is a form of torture. She approaches the counter, her eyes downcast, and asks the owner, a man with a perpetually sour expression, if she could possibly have a small bag of beans on credit. "Just until I can find some work," she whispers, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The man, Mr. Henderson, doesn't even look up from his ledger. "Ma'am, you already owe me for that loaf of bread from last week. I'm running a business here, not a charity." His voice is flat, devoid of malice, but full of an unyielding finality. The shame is a physical heat that spreads across her face as she turns and walks out, the bell mocking her empty-handed departure. One cold afternoon, she uses her last quarter at a payphone on a windswept corner, the receiver cold and hard against her ear. Her fingers, stiff and trembling, have trouble dialing the number she knows by heart, the number to Richard's office. She prays for a miracle, for his voice, for a flicker of the boy she raised. The phone rings once, twice, 3 times, each ring a hammer blow against her fragile hope. Then a cold, automated voice cuts through the static. "The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and dial again." She tries again, her heart pounding, convinced she must have made a mistake. The result is the same. He has not just ignored her, he has erased the very line of communication between them, severing the final thread that connected their two worlds. She hangs up the receiver, the silence on the other end of the line, the loudest, most definitive rejection of all. That night is the longest of her life. The cold from the floorboards seeps through the thin mattress, settling deep into her bones. Hunger is no longer a dull ache, but a sharp, biting pain in the pit of her stomach. She lies awake in the oppressive darkness, listening to the rhythmic drip of a leaky pipe in the wall, a sound like a clock counting down her final moments. She stares at the ceiling she cannot see and thinks of her husband's warm hands, of Richard's laughter as a child, of the smell of the earth after a spring rain. All of it feels like a dream from someone else's life. For the first time, a terrifying question forms in her mind. Why keep going? The sacrifices, the pain, the loneliness, what had it all been for? She feels the fight draining out of her, a slow, cold tide pulling her under, and she very nearly lets it take her. Just as the grey light of dawn begins to filter through the dirty window, there is a soft, hesitant knock on her door. Grace doesn't move at first, believing it to be a figment of her exhausted imagination. But the knock comes again, a little more insistent. With a monumental effort, she pulls her frail body from the bed and shuffles to the door, her bare feet cold against the splintered wood. When she opens it, she sees Mrs. Johnson, the tired-looking waitress from the boarding house's small diner, a woman she has only ever exchanged weary nods with. In her hands, Mrs. Johnson holds a small plate covered with a napkin. "I saw your light was off all night," she says, her voice raspy from years of taking orders. "Figured you might be hungry. This was left over from the breakfast rush. It's not much, but it's warm." Grace looks down at the plate. On it sits a single fluffy biscuit, split open and smothered in thick white sausage gravy, steam still rising from it in the cold hallway air. Her hands, those gnarled and forgotten instruments of sacrifice, tremble as she reaches out to take it. She looks into Mrs. Johnson's eyes and sees not pity, but a simple, profound understanding. The shared language of women who have known hardship. She cannot speak, a lump forming in her throat, so she just nods. This small gesture, this offering from a stranger, is more than just food. It is a lifeline. It is a quiet affirmation that even in the deepest, darkest valley of the shadow, a single candle of human kindness can be lit, providing just enough light to find the will to take one more step. Back in the Appalachian hills, the sound of splintering wood and collapsing walls echoed through the hollow as the demolition crew began their work on Grace's old shack. The structure came down easily, its rotten timbers offering little resistance. It was during the cleanup, as a worker swung his crowbar to break up the old stone hearth, that he heard a dull, hollow thud instead of the expected crack of rock. Puzzled, he cleared away the rubble and found the edges of a dark, rotting wooden box wedged beneath the foundation stones. With the help of another man, he pried it from the packed earth. The hinges crumbled to dust as they lifted the lid. For a long moment, the two men were silent, their rough, calloused hands frozen in midair. Inside, nestled in the dark, damp interior, was not dirt or forgotten tools, but the unmistakable, breathtaking glint of gold coins, tarnished silver, and the dull sparkle of old jewelry, a pirate's treasure in a pauper's home. The buyer of the property, a straightforward businessman from Lexington named Mr. Davies, was not a thief. When his crew called him, his initial disbelief gave way to a sense of legal duty. He knew this discovery was not his to claim. He hired a reputable inheritance lawyer, a man named Attorney Henderson, whose specialty was unraveling the tangled threads of forgotten family lines. Henderson began a methodical 3-week search for Grace Miller. The trail was cold, leading from dusty county records to the bus station in the nearest town, where no one remembered a lone elderly woman. He finally found a lead in Pineville, a place known more for its poverty than its opportunities. When he arrived at the rundown boarding house, his polished leather shoes looking alien on the grimy linoleum floor, he felt he was stepping into another century. He approached the front desk, his voice calm and professional. and asked for the whereabouts of a Mrs. Grace Miller. Henderson sat on the single, wobbly chair in Grace's 6-by-9-foot room, the air thick with the smell of damp and despair. He placed his briefcase on his lap, a stark symbol of another world. Grace sat on the edge of her lumpy mattress, her hands, those maps of a lifetime of hardship, clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She listened in a state of stunned silence as he calmly explained the situation. He spoke of the demolition, the discovery of a box, and the legal process of identifying her as the sole living heir of the man who had buried it. To Grace, the words were a confusing jumble, a story so far removed from her reality that it felt like a dream, or worse, a cruel and elaborate prank. She simply stared at him, her mind unable to bridge the chasm between the cold biscuit she had eaten for breakfast and the fortune this stranger was describing. She expected him to laugh at any moment and tell her it was all a mistake. With a trembling hand, Grace reached into the pocket of her faded apron and pulled out the only thing of value she possessed, the yellowed, folded letter from her grandfather. She held it out to the lawyer, an offering of the only proof she had of her lineage. "This was my grandfather's," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Attorney Henderson took the fragile document with a gentle reverence, his clean, manicured fingers a stark contrast to her own. He carefully unfolded the brittle paper and began to read aloud. For the first time, the swirling script came to life, her great-grandfather's words filling the small, sad room. He wrote of the turmoil of the war, of the fortune he had amassed as a trader, and of his decision to hide it for a future generation. The lawyer's voice was steady as he read the final, powerful sentence. "For my descendants, may they never lack for what I had in surplus." It was then that the dam of a lifetime of stoicism finally broke, and silent, heavy tears began to trace paths down Grace's weathered cheeks. After the initial appraisals of the coins, silver, and property deeds found in the box, we estimate the total value of the inheritance to be in excess of $2.5 million, Henderson stated, his tone matter-of-fact but his eyes kind. The number was an abstraction to Grace, a sound without meaning, like a word in a foreign language. What she did understand was what happened next. The lawyer reached into his own wallet and pulled out a small stack of crisp, new $100 bills. He placed them gently into her gnarled, trembling hands. "This is a preliminary advance from the estate, Mrs. Miller, for your immediate needs. My first order of business is to get you out of this place. We'll find you a comfortable hotel for tonight, and tomorrow we can start looking for a proper home for you." The feel of the money, clean and solid in her palm, was the first concrete evidence that her life, in that very instant, had irrevocably and profoundly changed. The story was too powerful to remain contained within the walls of the boarding house. It started as a rumor whispered among the tenants, then spread to the corner market, and from there to the local Pineville newspaper. A young reporter, sensing a story that transcended mere local interest, wrote a heartfelt article detailing Grace's life of hardship, her son's abandonment, and the incredible discovery. The piece, titled "Kentucky Mother Left Destitute by Son, Inherits Civil War Fortune," was picked up by a statewide news agency. In the digital age, it took less than 24 hours for the story to go viral. It spread like wildfire across social media platforms and news aggregators, a modern-day fable of poetic justice. The narrative was simple, powerful, and deeply resonant, and it was now hurtling through the ether, an unstoppable digital current flowing directly toward a gleaming skyscraper in Dallas, ready to shatter the carefully constructed world of an accountant named Richard Miller. The article hit Dallas like a stray bullet from a forgotten war, its headline a digital bombshell that exploded across computer screens. In the city's most powerful offices, elderly mother abandoned by son inherits multi-million-dollar fortune. Mr. Crawford, a man who built his empire on the unshakable foundation of facts, read the story twice in the tomb-like silence of his corner office. He clicked on the accompanying photo, and there she was, Grace Miller, the woman his son-in-law had described as a humble, deceased country person. The face in the picture was older, worn by a life he couldn't begin to imagine, but it was undeniably alive. He leaned back in his leather chair, the faint scent of cedar and old books filling the air, and a cold, precise anger began to crystallize within him. This was not a family matter. It was a breach of contract, a stain on his reputation. He had vetted Richard Miller, had built a partnership on the man's supposed integrity. The lie was not just a personal betrayal, it was a professional liability of the highest order. The summons was delivered via a terse email. "My office, now." When Richard entered, Mr. Crawford did not look up from his desk. He simply swiveled his monitor around to face him. The article glowed on the screen, an indictment more powerful than any legal document. "So your mother wasn't dead, Richard?" Mr. Crawford's voice was not loud. It was a blade of ice, honed to a razor's edge. "You've built your career in my firm, married my daughter, and sat at my table, all under the pretense of being an orphan of integrity. You haven't just made me look like an imbecile in front of my partners. You've exposed this firm to a level of public ridicule I will not tolerate." He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the polished desk. "Consider your employment terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your personal effects will be mailed to you once you provide a forwarding address." There was no room for explanation, no chance for an appeal. The verdict was absolute. Victoria's reaction was a storm of cold, calculated fury. When Richard arrived at their pristine apartment, his termination letter crumpled in his hand, he found her staring out the window, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't turn to face him. "My father called," she said, her voice dripping with a venomous contempt he had never heard before. "You mean to tell me that your mother, your provincial backwoods mother, is sitting on a fortune, and you sold her home for $500? She finally turned, her eyes blazing not with hurt, but with a greedy, bottomless rage. "We could have had that money, Richard. We could have been set for life, but you were too ashamed, too pathetic to admit where you came from." The disgust in her voice was a physical thing. "You're not the man I married. The man I married was smart, ambitious. You're just a fraud. My lawyer will be in touch. I want you out of my apartment by morning." The word "my" was a deliberate, final cut. The fall was as swift as it was brutal, a free fall from the 25th floor without a parachute. The first loss was his job, the source of his identity and income. The second was his wife, the pillar of his social standing. The third came in the form of an eviction notice taped to the door of the apartment, a property owned entirely by a trust in Mr. Crawford's name. Within a week, the luxury car, leased through the firm, was repossessed from the parking garage. His corporate credit cards were deactivated, and a hold was placed on his personal accounts, pending the divorce settlement. He went from a penthouse overlooking the glittering expanse of Dallas to sleeping on the worn couch of a college acquaintance, the smell of stale beer and regret replacing the scent of espresso and success. He was a ghost in the city that had once been his kingdom, a man stripped bare of the life he had so meticulously constructed, left with nothing but the crushing weight of the truth he had tried to bury. The journey back to Kentucky was the inverse of the one he had taken 2 decades earlier. There was no hope, no ambition, only the bitter taste of failure. He rode a Greyhound bus, the rumbling engine a constant reminder of his descent. The air inside was thick with the smell of cheap disinfectant and the quiet desperation of its passengers. He stared out the grime-streaked window at the passing landscape, the rolling green hills looking like a foreign country. His expensive suit was now wrinkled and stained, a ridiculous costume for the broken man he had become. When the bus finally pulled into the depot, he stepped out into the humid Kentucky air and began to walk, his polished city shoes ill-suited for the dusty country roads. Each step was a penance, a slow, humiliating pilgrimage back to the life he had so callously discarded, a prodigal son with nothing to offer but his own ruin. He arrived not at the dilapidated shack he remembered, but at a place he did not recognize. A modest, newly built house stood in its place, surrounded by a neatly tended garden bursting with marigolds and tomato plants. The scent of fresh paint and blooming flowers hung in the air. He stood at the end of the gravel driveway, a disheveled apparition with a week's worth of beard growth and the hollow, haunted eyes of a castaway. With a trembling hand, he knocked on the solid oak door. It was opened not by his mother, but by a woman with tired, kind eyes and a protective stance. It was Mrs. Johnson, her gaze as unyielding as steel. She looked him up and down, her expression a mixture of pity and contempt. "She's not expecting visitors," she said, her voice firm. But Grace had heard the knock. She appeared behind her friend, serene and calm, wearing a simple but clean cotton dress, her presence radiating a quiet, unshakable peace. Seeing her, whole and dignified, the carefully constructed dam of Richard's pride finally shattered. He fell to his knees on the welcome mat, the rough fibers digging into his trousers, and the sobs came in ragged, ugly bursts. "Mom, forgive me," he choked out, his words tangled with shame. "I was a monster. I abandoned you, I denied you, I sold your home for nothing, I've lost everything. I have nothing, Mom. Only you." He looked up at her, his face streaked with tears and dirt, a desperate plea in his eyes for the unconditional love he had so long taken for granted. Grace looked down at the broken man who was her son, her face a mask of deep weariness, a profound sadness for the boy he had been and the man he had become. There was no hatred in her eyes, only the calm finality of a long and painful chapter coming to a close. "Get up off the ground, son. It's cold," she said, her voice steady and even, carrying no trace of the anger he deserved. He scrambled to his feet, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in his chest. Perhaps this was it, the moment of redemption, the return to the fold. "I forgive you, Richard," Grace said, and the words seemed to lift a physical weight from his shoulders. "I forgave you the day you made me put my thumbprint on those papers, but forgiving you doesn't mean opening the door to my life again. There is no room for you here anymore." Her gaze was unwavering, filled not with malice but with a newfound strength. "You looked for gold in the wrong place, and when you had it right in front of you, you sold it for pennies. Go. Make your own way. That way is no longer next to me." She then gently closed the solid oak door, the quiet click of the latch echoing in the silent afternoon, a soft but definitive end to a lifetime of pain. The mornings in Grace's new life begin not with the biting cold of a dirt floor, but with the gentle warmth of sunlight filtering through clean curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She wakes in a soft bed, the scent of lavender from the sheets a quiet luxury she never imagined. Her days are no longer a relentless cycle of labor, but a gentle rhythm of peace. With Mrs. Johnson, who now lives with her as a companion and friend, she tends to a small but vibrant garden. Her hands, still gnarled and mapped with a lifetime of hardship, now feel the soft, yielding texture of rich soil and the delicate petals of marigolds. They are the same hands, but their purpose has been transformed from servitude to creation. She moves through her small, comfortable house with a serenity that seems to have settled deep into her bones, a quiet contentment that is more valuable than any treasure ever buried beneath the earth. In the afternoons, the two women sit on the porch in comfortable rocking chairs, the soft click-clack of their knitting needles, a soothing counterpoint to the distant song of cicadas. An old radio plays soft melodies from a bygone era, filling the air with a gentle nostalgia. This simple shared silence is a world away from the oppressive, lonely quiet of the boarding house in Pineville. They speak of simple things, the weather, the progress of the tomato plants, a new knitting pattern. There is no grand drama, only the profound comfort of companionship and the slow, peaceful passing of time. This is the life Grace had bought for her son, a life of ease and security, and in a twist of fate she could never have foreseen, it is the life she has finally claimed for herself. It is a peace not born from the absence of struggle, but forged in its very fires, making it all the more precious and unshakable. On the small table beside her bed, her grandfather's letter rests in a simple, elegant wooden frame. It is no longer a mysterious, crinkled relic hidden in her apron pocket, but a proud testament to her history, its elegant script, a visible link to a past she now understands. She looks at it each morning not as a symbol of the money it led to, but as a reminder of the resilience that flows through her bloodline. It speaks of survival, of a legacy not of wealth but of endurance. The words her great-grandfather wrote, "May they never lack for what I had in surplus," have taken on a new, deeper meaning. The surplus was not just gold, but strength, a strength that had been passed down to her, allowing her to weather a lifetime of storms. The letter is her anchor, connecting her to the long, unbroken line of those who came before her, a quiet affirmation of her own worth and place in the world. She carries no hatred for Richard. The anger, the deep, soul-crushing hurt, has been washed away, replaced by a calm, quiet stillness. She does not sit by the phone waiting for a call that will never come. She does not wonder where he is or what has become of him. Her forgiveness was not a transaction. It was a release. By forgiving him, she had untethered herself from the weight of his betrayal, freeing herself to finally live her own life. The door she closed that day was not just a physical barrier. It was the closing of a painful chapter, a definitive end to a lifetime of one-sided sacrifice. Her heart, once a vessel of hope and longing for her son, is now simply her own. It beats with a steady, peaceful rhythm, content in the present, unburdened by the past, and unconcerned with a future that no longer includes him. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Dallas, Richard Miller drifts through the underbelly of the city he once believed he had conquered. He is a ghost, haunting the edges of his former life, working a series of cash-in-hand jobs, stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery, washing dishes in a greasy diner, each one a humiliating reminder of how far he has fallen. He lives in a transient motel where the smell of industrial cleaner and stale desperation clings to everything. At night he stares at the water-stained ceiling and is haunted not by the fortune he lost, but by the image of his mother's calm face and the quiet final click of the closing door. The weight of his choices is a physical presence, a constant ache in his chest. He learned too late that the life he had built was a house of cards, and the foundation he had so casually destroyed was the only thing that had ever been real. Grace's story became a quiet lesson whispered on front porches and in church pews throughout the county, a modern fable of justice taking the long, dusty road home. Her life is a testament to a simple, profound truth, that true wealth is not something you dig from the ground, but the dignity and resilience you carry inside you, a treasure no one can take or devalue. Her peace is the final, quiet victory, a state of grace earned through a lifetime of suffering and found in the simple act of letting go. She is living proof that a life of integrity, though it may walk through the valley of the shadow, will eventually find its way into the sun. Because while life always collects its debts, sometimes, just sometimes, it also finds a way to return what was stolen.